I will never forget that dinner. The sound of silverware against my grandmother's aged porcelain. The smell of the homemade tomato sauce my mother always made for important occasions. The look on her face when she cleared her throat, smiled at my sister, and then glanced at me with that familiar coldness. Now that the business is stable and profitable again, my mother announced, avoiding my gaze, it's time to think about the next generation. I've decided that I'm going to transfer ownership of the grocery store to Daniela. 6 months of exhausting work. All my savings invested. A thriving career abandoned. And with a single sentence, all of it was reduced to nothing. As if I had been nothing more than a temporary tool, disposable once the hard work was done. At that moment, something inside me shifted. They expected me to lower my head, to accept it as I always had, but this time would be different. They had no idea what was coming. It all started with a phone call 8 months earlier. I was in my office in Chicago, finishing up a presentation for an important client, when Miguel's name flashed on my phone screen. Julia, your mother is about to lose the grocery store. They have less than 3 months before the banks take everything. My stomach dropped. Martinez Grocery, the business my father had built from nothing, the backbone of our neighborhood's Latino community for over 3 decades, was on the brink of bankruptcy. How long? I asked, already calculating in my head how much money I had saved. 90 days at most, but honestly, the way things are going, maybe less. That night I couldn't sleep. I pictured my father, Antonio, his calloused hands meticulously arranging the shelves every morning, his deep laugh as he chatted with longtime customers in rapid Spanish, his pride when he taught me about profit margins and inventory management, back when I still wore braids. One day, all of this will be yours and your sister's, Julia, he used to say. But never forget that a store isn't just a business. It's a beating heart at the center of a community. 5 years since he passed. 5 years since my mother took over, refusing to change any of my father's outdated methods. 5 years watching from afar as retail giants invaded the neighborhood, offering lower prices and wider selections. The next day, I requested a temporary leave from my job. My boss, confused, tried to convince me to stay. Julia, you're about to be promoted. This project could define your career. I need to take care of some family matters, I replied simply, knowing I might be throwing away years of hard work. When I arrived in our hometown in Arizona, the reality was even worse than Miguel had described. The facade of Martinez Grocery, once vibrant with colors that reflected my family's Mexican roots, was now faded and peeling. The neon sign had several burned-out letters. Inside, the shelves were half empty, the employees looked unmotivated, and the refrigeration system made an alarming noise. My mother, Carmela, greeted me with a quick, formal hug, as if I were just another customer. You didn't have to come all the way here, Julia. These are just temporary struggles, she insisted, as she led me to the small office in the back, the same one where my father used to do the bookkeeping by hand in his hardcover ledgers. Miguel told me you're about to lose everything, Mama. Miguel exaggerates. Besides, what do you know about running a grocery store? Your father ran this place for decades without all those modern strategies you learned in your expensive colleges. The comment stung, but it wasn't new. My decision to leave town for college had always been seen as a kind of betrayal. As if choosing a different life meant I loved my family any less. That night, I found Daniela at home, absorbed in her laptop. My younger sister, a recent economics graduate, had been living with our mother since she finished college. Julia. It's been so long, she exclaimed, closing her computer as if she had something to hide. Her hug was enthusiastic, but brief. So you've come to the rescue? The slightly ironic tone didn't go unnoticed. I came to help. The situation looked serious. Daniela shrugged, picking up her phone to check her messages. Why worry about an outdated grocery store? We should sell the property and invest in something more profitable. I've been sending out resumes to some companies in Phoenix. Bigger and better things, you know? That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I met Miguel at the local bar where we had gathered since high school. He brought a thick folder of documents. I gathered everything I could find, he said, sliding the folder across the table. It's worse than I initially thought, Jules. For hours, we went through spreadsheets, bank statements, and sales reports. The reality was brutal. Declining sales for the past 3 years, mounting debt, a bank loan due in 90 days with no chance of renewal under the current conditions. To top it off, the lease agreement with Robert Chen, the building owner, was up for renewal next month, and rumors suggested he was planning a significant rent increase. "How much do you think we need to stabilize things?" I asked, feeling the weight of the situation. Miguel adjusted his glasses, a habit he had since childhood whenever he was worried. "To save the place? At least $60,000 to cover immediate debts and make some essential renovations. But to truly transform the business and make it viable long-term? A lot more than that." I swallowed hard. That was almost all my savings. The money I had been setting aside to eventually buy my own apartment in Chicago, the fund that could give me freedom if something went wrong in my career. "And your mother and Daniela?" Miguel hesitated. "Are they really willing to make the necessary changes? Because without a complete transformation in how the store operates, they don't have a choice," I answered, more determined than I actually felt. "I'm not going to let my father's legacy disappear." The next morning, I looked at Martinez, grocery in the soft light of dawn. I envisioned what it could become, a business that honored tradition while embracing the future, a place my father would recognize but also admire for its evolution. I picked up my phone and called my boss in. "Chicago, I'm going to need more time," I said. "Actually, I'm requesting an unpaid leave of absence for 6 months." The silence on the other end of the line said it all. My position probably wouldn't be there when I returned, if I returned, as I hung up. I saw my mother watching from inside the store, her face a mix of concern and skepticism. Beside her, Daniela was staring at her phone, completely oblivious to the crucial moment we were living through. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. It was time to roll up my sleeves and fight for my family's legacy, even if they didn't immediately understand my worth. I was going to save this business, no matter the personal cost. Little did I know, the real battle hadn't even begun. The next 6 months taught me the true meaning of resilience. Every morning started before sunrise and ended long after the last neighborhood lights had gone out. Martinez Grocery became not just my workplace but my life's project, my obsession. My first target was the inventory system. I found my mother in the office, surrounded by stacks of handwritten notebooks identical to the ones my father had used since 1990. "We need to digitize all of this," I announced, placing my laptop on the table. My mother looked up from the numbers. She was trying to reconcile. "Your father always did it this way. It worked for 30 years. And now it doesn't work anymore," I replied more firmly than I intended. "We're losing money on expired products. We don't know what sells well and what doesn't, and we spend hours doing what a simple program could do in minutes." After 3 days of arguments, she gave in but refused to learn the new system. "You want to change things so badly, then you take care of it." I spent an entire week manually entering all the inventory, discovering in the process dozens of products that were incorrectly recorded, items we hadn't sold in months taking up valuable space, and missed opportunities for products that customers frequently asked for, but we never kept in stock. The next step was harder, renegotiating with suppliers. Some of them were personal friends of my father, men he did business with on a handshake instead of contracts. I felt like an intruder, a cold corporate type, when I started questioning prices and terms. "Don Eduardo," I approached our main supplier of imported goods. "I need better prices on high turnover items and more flexibility on returns for items that don't sell well." The gray-haired man looked at me as if I had suggested something indecent. "Your mother never complained about our arrangements." "My mother is about to lose the store," I responded bluntly, "and you're about to lose a customer of 3 decades. And so it went for weeks, meeting resistance at every turn, not just from suppliers and employees used to the old way of doing things, but mostly from my own family. "What are you doing to the shelves?" my mother exclaimed when I started reorganizing the store, placing higher margin products at eye level and staple items in the back so customers would walk through the entire space. "Maximizing flow and impulse sales," I responded, consulting a diagram I had drawn. "The way it is now, people come in, grab what they need, and leave. We need them to see more, want more, buy more. Daniela, who had been showing up at the store more often, out of curiosity, I assume, shook her head. That's manipulative. It's survival, I corrected her, and it's exactly what big chains do to take our customers. The biggest win in those early months came from a simple idea that completely changed how people perceived the store. I started highlighting our cultural heritage as a key differentiator. I created a special section for authentic Latin American products that were hard to find in major chains. I began printing traditional recipes and placing them next to the necessary ingredients. My grandmother used to make a sauce like this. An elderly woman commented, holding one of the recipes with a nostalgic smile. She left with a bag full of products she hadn't originally planned to buy. Then, in a burst of inspiration, I convinced my mother to start a small prepared food section using some of the family recipes she had kept stored away. It's too much work, she initially complained. It's a way to keep alive what Dad started, I argued. Besides, I've noticed a lot of young families in the neighborhood who don't have time to cook from scratch, but value authentic homemade food. To my surprise, this was the first idea that genuinely excited her. Soon, the smell of her stews and tamales filled the store every morning, attracting a completely new clientele. For the first time since I had returned, I saw a glimpse of the vibrant woman my mother used to be before my father passed away. On social media, I created profiles for the grocery store and started telling its story through old photos I found in dusty albums. I posted about customers who had been coming for decades, shared the recipes we offered in the store, and highlighted unique products that only we sold in the area. I don't understand why anyone would care about pictures of an old grocery store, Daniela commented, watching me update posts one night. People don't care about the store, I explained. They care about stories, about authenticity, about connection. A month later, young Hispanics and non-Hispanics started showing up, phones in hand, mentioning they had seen our profile online. Some came from distant neighborhoods specifically to try my mother's dishes, or buy that one spicy sauce they couldn't find anywhere else. But the biggest battle was still ahead, renegotiating the lease with Robert Chen. Our first meeting was a disaster. The current market value is 40% higher than what you're paying, he stated bluntly in his minimalist office. I have 3 chains interested in this space. Mr. Chen, my family has been renting this space for 3 decades. We're part of the community. Business is business, Miss Martinez. Sentiment doesn't pay my bills. I walked out of that meeting feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. This rent increase would make everything we were building impossible. I spent the entire night going over the numbers, searching for any possible solution. The next morning, I went back to his office with a different proposal. I have data showing how Martinez Grocery brings customers to the entire shopping complex, I began, opening my laptop. Our customers go to the laundromat next door, the pharmacy on the corner, and even your new restaurant at the end of the block. I presented a study I had conducted, interviewing customers, analyzing traffic patterns, and demonstrating the value our presence brought to the entire strip mall. Additionally, I continued, we're investing in renovations that will increase this traffic even more. All I'm asking for is a 5-year lease with gradual increases instead of a sudden spike. Something about my determination must have impressed Chen. After a week of tense negotiations, we reached a deal. 5 years with 5% annual increases, far below the 40% he had originally demanded. As I implemented these changes, I wasn't just investing time. I was putting in my own savings. The digital system, the storefront renovation, the new energy-efficient refrigerators. Everything came out of my pocket, not the store's already empty funds. I sold my car, moved into a tiny studio near the grocery store, and used every penny I had to finance the transformation. Miguel, always by my side, voiced his concerns during one of our late-night bookkeeping sessions. Julia, you're putting everything you have into this. What if it doesn't work? I looked out the small office window at the renovated store. The new LED lights illuminated neatly stocked shelves. An elderly customer chatted happily with my mother while sampling some food. A young couple browsed our new organic products section. It has to work, Miguel. It's not just a business. It's my father's legacy, my mother's livelihood. It's part of who I am. At the end of the 6th month, when I sat down with Miguel to go over the financial statements, the The numbers finally started to make sense. Sales had increased by 15% compared to the same period the previous year. Operating costs had dropped thanks to greater efficiency. The most urgent debts had been paid off. We weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time there was a real light at the end of the tunnel. "I think we've managed to avoid immediate bankruptcy," Miguel said with a cautious smile. That night, my mother surprised me. As we closed up the store, she stopped beside me and, without looking directly at me, said in a quiet voice, "The new shelf arrangement works better than the old one." Coming from her, that was a profound statement of approval. A small acknowledgement that meant the world to me. Daniela, on the other hand, remained distant from the business, showing up only occasionally. When she did, she always had a criticism ready. "The lighting is too bright." "Why change the coffee brand we've always sold?" "These new employee uniforms look so corporate." I absorbed the criticism and kept moving forward. The transformation was just beginning, and something told me the real challenges were yet to come. What I didn't expect, however, was that the greatest threat wouldn't come from competitors or debt, but from within my own family. The year following my return felt like watching a long-neglected garden bloom again. Martina's grocery didn't just survive, it began to thrive in ways I hadn't even imagined possible. On Saturday mornings, it had become common to see a small line forming before we even opened. Regular customers came for the fresh tamales my mother made. Soon, we realized we could expand our prepared food section beyond just a few initial items. "What if we turned that back storage space into a small commercial kitchen?" I suggested during a family dinner. My unpaid leave had officially ended months ago, but I had already decided to stay indefinitely, though I hadn't communicated that to my family yet. My mother, who had resisted every change until then, surprisingly agreed almost immediately. "I have so many of my grandmother's recipes that we never had the space to prepare here." It was the first time she had suggested an idea of her own for the business since I had returned. A small but significant moment. We reorganized the space, invested in basic commercial kitchen equipment, and started offering daily meals for families who could stop by after work and take home authentic homemade food for dinner. The new section quickly became a third of our total revenue. Our presence on social media kept growing organically. I started posting short videos of my mother teaching traditional recipes, and they regularly reached thousands of views. Customers came from neighboring areas, mentioning they had discovered us online. One of these new customers was Laura Kimball, editor of the regional magazine Southwest Living. She initially came for the homemade salsa we had started bottling, but became intrigued by the store's story. "This is fascinating," she said as we talked about the business's transformation. A family-owned Latino grocery store not just surviving, but thriving in the era of delivery apps and big chains. "Would you be open to an article about you all?" 3 weeks later, Martina's Grocery took up 4 pages in the magazine under the title, "Renewal with Roots: How a Family Grocery Store is Redefining Local Business in the 21st Century." The feature highlighted our innovations while celebrating the cultural authenticity we had preserved. The day the magazine was published, we had the busiest day in our history. My mother, wearing her embroidered apron with the updated Martinez grocery logo, looked decades younger as she excitedly chatted with new and longtime customers, sharing stories about the origins of our family recipes. The numbers didn't lie. By the end of that intense year of work, sales had risen an impressive 40% compared to the year before I arrived. Our profits had tripled, and the bank debt that had nearly led us to bankruptcy was reduced to a third of its original amount. We hired 3 new employees, including Elena, a young local chef who had studied gastronomy and wanted to explore her Mexican culinary roots. She oversaw our expanded kitchen, bringing a contemporary touch to the traditional recipes we offered. One ordinary Tuesday, as I was organizing our new online ordering system, I received an email that made me pause. It was from Vincent Miller, my former boss in Chicago, with an offer to return to the agency in a director position with a significantly higher salary than I had before. "We've been following your work revitalizing your family's business through social media," he wrote. "What you've done there is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we want on our senior team." That same day, I received another offer from a competing agency in Phoenix. Apparently, our recovery story had made an impression in professional circles beyond our local community. Sitting alone in the office after hours, I considered these opportunities. A year ago, I would have jumped at either of them without hesitation. Now, the thought of leaving Martinez Grocery felt unthinkable. We hadn't just saved a business, we were building a vision, realizing a potential that was only beginning to unfold. I declined both offers and started drafting a 5-year plan for the grocery store. I saw possibilities for expansion, maybe a second location in a nearby neighborhood where many Latino families were settling. I envisioned a product line under the Martinez brand: salsas, sauces, pre-mixed seasonings based on my grandmother's recipes. Even a small cafe adjacent to the main store seemed like a possibility. One night, as I discussed some of these ideas with Miguel at his apartment, I brought up a topic I had been avoiding. I think it's time to formalize my position in my business, I said, trying to sound casual. I've invested practically all my savings, turned down career opportunities, and have been working without a proper salary for over a year. Miguel adjusted his glasses, a gesture I recognized as a sign he was carefully choosing his words. Have you talked to your mom about this yet? Not yet. I wanted to have concrete numbers first, show the value I've added, make the conversation more about business and less about family dynamics. He nodded. Makes sense. But don't put it off too long. The longer you stay in this informal arrangement, the more complicated it could get. It was around this time that I noticed a subtle shift in Daniela's behavior. My sister, who had remained distant from the family business for so long, suddenly started showing up more frequently. Not just for quick errands or social visits, she stayed for hours, observing operations, asking questions about suppliers, profit margins, and future plans. At first, I saw it as a genuine, albeit late, interest, and I felt optimistic. Maybe we could finally work together, each contributing our unique skills. I openly shared information, showing her our new system, explaining our marketing strategies, introducing her to employees and suppliers. "This is really impressive, Jules," she said one day, using my childhood nickname for the first time in years. "You've completely transformed this place." The unexpected compliment warmed me. It was the first genuine acknowledgement I had received from her since I returned. "Thanks, Danny. It would mean so much to Dad to see the business not just surviving, but growing." She nodded, a contemplative look on her face. "He was always so passionate about this place. I think I understand why now." A few days later, on my way to work, I saw Daniela leaving the grocery store early in the morning, something unusual for her. "Hey, you're here early," I commented, surprised. She looked momentarily uncomfortable. "Oh yeah, I just had some questions for Mama about, family matters." Something about the way she avoided my gaze set off a small alarm in my mind, but I pushed the concern aside. I was too happy about her growing involvement to question her motives. It was about a week later when Miguel approached me during our late-night inventory check, his expression serious. "Julia, have you noticed your mom and Daniela having a lot of private meetings lately?" "Daniela is finally showing interest in the business," I replied, focused on checking the numbers. "That's a good sign, isn't it?" Miguel hesitated. Normally, I'd agree. But something in his tone made me look up. "But what?" "The way they stop talking when you get close. Something is going on. Yesterday, I saw Daniela showing your mother some kind of document, and when I asked what it was, they both changed the subject immediately." A discomfort settled in my chest. "It might be nothing. Maybe personal matters." "Maybe," he agreed, though he didn't sound convinced. "Just be careful, Julia. You've invested so much here. Not just money, but your whole heart." I tried to ignore the warning, but in the following days, I started noticing the signs Miguel had mentioned. Conversations that abruptly stopped when I entered the room. Meaningful glances exchanged between my mother and sister. Documents quickly tucked away into drawers. One afternoon, while searching for a file in the office, I found a paper with the letterhead of a local law firm specializing in business law. Before I could read more, my mother walked in and practically snatched the document from my hands. "This is private," she said firmly, slipping it into her purse. That night, sitting alone in my small apartment, a disturbing doubt began to grow. What exactly were my mother and sister planning? Why so much secrecy in a business I had become an integral part of? I decided it was time for an honest conversation. The next day, I would bring up the subject directly with my mother, clarify my intentions and expectations for the future of Martinez Grocery. Little did I know they had other plans, and everything was about to change in a way I could never have predicted. The calendar on the wall marked exactly 18 months since I had returned to town. 18 months of exhausting work, personal sacrifices, and the gradual transformation of the family business. The date made me reflect on everything we had accomplished as I set the table for the family dinner my mother had insisted on organizing. "It's a special occasion," she had mentioned that morning without elaborating. "Invite Miguel too. I have an important announcement to make." The kitchen of the house where I had grown up was filled with the comforting aroma of my childhood. Chile, Colorado, saffron rice, and the refried beans my mother made just as her grandmother had taught her. For a moment, I felt transported back to our Sunday dinners when my father was still alive, when our family felt whole and the problems of adult life seemed distant. Miguel arrived promptly at 7, bringing a bottle of wine. His expression revealed an apprehension he was trying to mask with forced smiles. Had he sensed the same strange energy I had been noticing? "Thanks for coming," I murmured as I hugged him. "Something tells me I'm going to need an ally tonight." "I'm always on your side," he replied softly. Daniela walked into the dining room wearing a formal outfit that felt excessive for a simple family dinner. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she carried a folder of documents. The sight of it intensified my unease. Dinner unfolded with tense small talk. My mother asked about the store, the recent numbers, the new customers, topics she normally avoided discussing outside business hours. Daniela remained strangely quiet, checking her phone occasionally as if waiting for an important message. When my mother served dessert, homemade flan, my father's favorite, she finally cleared her throat formally. The moment I had been dreading had arrived. "I've been thinking a lot about the future of Martinez Grocery," she began, placing her folded hands on the table, "about the legacy your father built and how we want it to continue." I nodded, trying to ignore the growing feeling that something was deeply wrong. "What you've done for the business is impressive, Julia," she continued, her words sounding rehearsed. "The store is in better shape than it has been in years." "Thank you, Mama," I responded cautiously. "I actually have some ideas for the next." "Please let me finish," she interrupted, something rare coming from her. "As I was saying, now that the business is stable and profitable again, it's time to think about the next generation. I've decided that I'm going to transfer ownership of the grocery store to Daniela." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at Daniela, who was now smiling slightly, opening her folder to reveal neatly organized documents. "I've already prepared a transition plan," my sister quickly interjected, sliding some papers across the table, "including an organizational restructuring and some ideas for future expansion." The scene felt surreal. The flan in front of me, once inviting, now churned in my stomach. "I don't understand," I finally managed to say. "I abandoned my career. I invested my savings. I worked 16-hour days for over a year to save this business. And we're very grateful for that," my mother replied mechanically. "Julia did an admirable job saving the business," she continued, now looking at Miguel as if seeking validation. "And of course, there will always be a place for her as an employee." "Employee?" I repeated, the word burning on my tongue. "Marketing. Manager would be your official title," Daniela quickly added, "with a competitive salary, of course." Miguel set his wine glass down with unnecessary force. "This can't be serious. Julia literally saved this business from bankruptcy." My mother's expression hardened. "Martinez Grocery has always been mine since Antonio passed away. The decision about its future is mine to make." I tried to process what was happening. "Why?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt inside. "Why hand the business to someone who never showed interest until it became successful, who contributed nothing to its recovery?" My mother's response revealed family truths I had always suspected, but had never been spoken so openly. "Daniela is younger and needs a foundation. You're already successful and can find opportunities anywhere. Besides, your father always wanted the grocery store to stay in the family, and Daniela is more likely to settle down here and have children." The implications hit me in waves. My sacrifice, work, and vision were secondary to traditional expectations about family and gender roles. No matter how much I had contributed, for my mother, my worth was tied to criteria that had nothing to do with competence or dedication. Daniela, noticing my devastated expression, tried to offer what she thought was a concession. "You can keep implementing your marketing ideas, Julia. We just need someone with real financial expertise to manage the business side." The condescension in her tone was the final straw. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "Real financial expertise?" I repeated. "Who do you think negotiated with suppliers to cut our costs by 22%? Who restructured our bank loan? Who implemented an inventory system that slashed our waste in half?" "I'm not saying you didn't help," Daniela backpedaled slightly. "Helped? I saved this business, while you were sending out resumes to corporations and suggesting we should sell everything and invest in something more profitable." My mother stood up as well, her voice taking on that authoritative tone she rarely used. "That's enough, Julia. The decision has been made. The papers are already prepared." Miguel looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Martinez, with all due respect, this doesn't seem fair or even smart from a business perspective." "I don't recall asking for your opinion, Miguel," my mother replied coldly. With trembling hands, I grabbed my purse. "You can't just discard me like this, not after everything I've done." "No one is discarding you," my mother insisted, her voice softening slightly. "We're offering you a permanent position, with profit sharing eventually. It's a generous arrangement." "Generous?" The word came out as a bitter laugh. "You're offering me scraps of what I helped build." I turned to leave, but Daniela grabbed my arm. "Julia, you're overreacting. Think of it as an opportunity to continue what you started without all the administrative burden. You always preferred the creative side of the business anyway." I pulled my arm away. "Don't give me that condescending speech. You saw the business becoming profitable and decided you wanted a piece of it. I'm not surprised, considering you've always had everything handed to you." A heavy silence followed my words. I knew I had crossed a line, exposing long-buried family resentments. But at that moment, I didn't care. "If that's how you feel," my mother finally said, "maybe it's best if you don't continue at the grocery store anyway." I looked at her, searching for any trace of the woman who had raised me, who had taught me to stand up for myself, who had told me I could be anything I wanted. Instead, I saw only a stranger who had chosen loyalty to outdated traditions over recognizing the value of her own daughter. "You're right," I agreed, my voice now surprisingly steady. "If this is how you value my contribution, maybe it's best if I don't stay." I walked to the door, Miguel silently rising to follow me. At the threshold, I turned one last time. Dad wouldn't have approved of this. He believed in merit and hard work, not favoritism and empty traditions. On the sidewalk outside the house where I had grown up, the stars shone indifferently over the human drama unfolding below them. Miguel placed a comforting arm around my shoulders. "They can't legally do this, you know," he said. "You invested. Personal money? There might be a case for an implied partnership." I shook my head, too exhausted to consider legal battles at that moment. I don't know if I want to fight for a place where I'm clearly not valued. "And what are you going to do?" It was a question I was trying to answer myself. My entire life over the past 18 months had been dedicated to Martinez Grocery. I had turned down other opportunities, invested everything I had, both financially and emotionally, into that business. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I do know that I don't deserve to be treated this way, and I'm not just going to accept it without a fight." As we walked down the familiar street under the yellow glow of the streetlights, a mix of emotions churned inside me: anger, hurt, betrayal. But beneath it all, something else was beginning to form: determination. This wouldn't be my final word in the story of Martinez Grocery, nor would it define my worth or my future. The betrayal that night had closed a chapter, but my instincts told me this wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the catalyst for something none of us could predict. Sleepless nights became my new routine. Wrapped in a blanket on the couch of my tiny apartment, I cycled between burning rage and deep sadness. The file open on my laptop contained meticulous spreadsheets detailing every cent I had invested in Martina's grocery, every hour I had dedicated, every innovation I had implemented. The numbers told a clear story, a story of commitment that my family had chosen to ignore. "Are you documenting everything?" Miguel asked during one of our frequent late-night calls. "Down to the last receipt," I confirmed, taking a sip of the cold coffee I had forgotten beside me. "Not that it matters. They've already made up their minds." "It does matter," he insisted. "Legally, you have a strong case. You may not be in moi. Official partner on paper, but your personal investments and the work you've done..." I shut my laptop harder than necessary. "I don't want to sue my own family, Miguel." "Then what do you want, Julia?" The question lingered in the air like smoke. What did I really want? Revenge? Recognition? Or just the chance to finish what I had started? On the third day after the disastrous dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my Aunt Gabriela, my mother's older sister, holding a container of homemade food. "Your mother mentioned that you two had a disagreement," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Disagreement?" I repeated with a dry laugh. "Is that what she called it?" Aunt Gabriela looked around my apartment, wrinkled clothes draped over chairs, dirty dishes in the sink, papers scattered across the table. Her gaze wasn't judgmental, but understanding. "Let's talk," she said simply, heading to the kitchen to heat up the food she had brought. As we ate, I poured everything out. The betrayal, the injustice, the obvious favoritism, the complete disregard for all my work. Aunt Gabriela listened in silence, occasionally nodding. "It's always been this way," I concluded, pushing my empty plate aside. "Daniela has always been the favorite. No matter what I do, it's never enough." My aunt took a long sip of water before responding. "Carmela always favored Daniela because she sees herself in your sister," she finally explained. "Both cautious, traditional, risk-averse. You, with your independence and innovative ideas, have always intimidated her a little." I intimidated my own mother? The idea seemed absurd. Your mother grew up in a world where women like you, ambitious, independent, were often punished for those qualities, not rewarded. I shook my head, unconvinced. That doesn't justify what she's doing. No, it doesn't, Gabriela agreed, to my surprise. In fact, let me tell you a secret. Your father never intended for the grocery store to go only to Daniela. My heart pounded. What do you mean? Antonio came to me a few weeks before he passed. He was worried his health was getting worse and wanted to discuss the future of the business. She adjusted her glasses, recalling the conversation. He valued your practical mindset, Julia. He said you had the true entrepreneurial spirit of the family. A wave of emotion hit me as I imagined my father saying those words. He started drafting a succession plan that included both of you with your innovative vision, Daniela with her financial conservatism. Complementary, not competing. Gabriela sighed. Unfortunately, he passed before he could formalize anything, leaving everything to your mother with the unwritten understanding that she would be fair. Why didn't you tell me this before? I hoped Carmela would come to the same conclusion on her own, that she would see the value you bring. She took my hand. Besides, you seemed so happy in Chicago, building your own life. I didn't want to drag you back into family drama. I spent the night processing this revelation. The idea that my father had seen value in my skills, that he had planned to include me in the family legacy, solidified my determination. It was no longer just about defending my financial investment. It was about honoring the vision my father had for the business he loved. The next morning, Miguel showed up with coffee and donuts, finding me already dressed and working on my computer. You look different, he observed. I had a revealing conversation with my aunt. As I shared what Gabriela had told me, Miguel's expression shifted from surprise to determination. That changes everything. What are you going to do? I won't let my work be taken from me, and I won't abandon my father's legacy without a fight, I answered with newfound clarity. Not out of bitterness, but because I genuinely believe I'm the right person to carry this business forward, or at least part of it. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into a 3-phase plan that emerged from the emotional fog that had consumed me. First, I meticulously documented all the changes I had implemented, the personal financial investment I had made, and the specific value I had added to the business. I hired an independent accountant to validate my numbers, ensuring they couldn't be dismissed as emotional exaggerations. Second, I started working on a business plan for my own venture, one that incorporated everything I had learned but with my unique vision, not as an act of revenge, but as an insurance policy for my future. I've been dreaming about this idea of a cafe adjacent to the grocery store, I explained to Miguel as we worked through potential financial projections. But what if instead I opened my own place, focused on authentic Latin food, but with a contemporary twist? Direct competition, Miguel noted, raising an eyebrow. Not necessarily. It would be complementary, focused on a different experience. It would honor the traditions I learned from my family, but with my own signature. The third and most important component of my plan was the hardest. I would have an open and final conversation with my mother and Daniela, offering one last chance for a fair resolution. I need you to be there, I told Miguel. Not as my accountant, but as an impartial witness, someone who knows the facts, not just the emotions. Of course, he agreed immediately, but you should also invite your Aunt Gabriela. Your mother may not listen to me, but she respects her sister's opinion. As the plan took shape, something unexpected happened. I started to find an inner peace that had eluded me in the days following the disastrous dinner. It was no longer just about fighting for what was fair, though that was still important. It was about finding my own path, defined not in opposition to my family, but as an authentic expression of who I was. It's not just about winning, I explained to Miguel as we finalized preparations for the meeting. It's about staying true to who I am and what I believe in, no matter the outcome. He smiled, that genuine smile that always reminded me why our friendship had endured time and distance. That's why you'll get what you want, Julia, because deep down, it's not about ego or revenge for you. It's about purpose. On the eve of the scheduled meeting, I received an unexpected message from Daniela. Can we talk before tomorrow? Just the two of us? I hesitated, recalling the still fresh sting of betrayal. But something about the simplicity of the request made me agree. We arranged to meet at the park where we used to play as children. Daniela was already sitting on the swing when I arrived, looking strangely vulnerable and much younger than her 26 years. Thanks for coming, she said, her eyes fixed on the ground. I wouldn't know what to do if you just disappeared from my life. It was the first crack in the facade of rivalry that had defined our relationship for so long. I sat on the swing beside her, the silence between us filled only by the creaking of the rusty chains. Why did you go along with that plan, Danny? I finally asked, using her childhood nickname. You know it's not fair. She kept staring at the ground. At first, it seemed to make sense. Mama argued that you always had more opportunities, that everything always came easy for you, that I needed this head start in life more than you did. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it, she admitted. It's easier than admitting I spent years focusing on the wrong things, letting you do all the hard work. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the empty playground. You know, I never intended to take your place, I continued. I always imagined that we could work together, each of us contributing our skills. Daniela finally looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know that now, and I'm scared I won't be able to run the grocery store on my own. Not the way you did. That admission of vulnerability, so unlike my proud sister, touched something deep within me. Maybe there was still hope for our family, not on the terms our mother had set, but in something new that we could create together. We'll figure it out, I promised, not entirely sure what that would mean. As we walked back in the twilight, I felt a new layer being added to my plan, one that wasn't just about protecting my interests, but possibly rebuilding bridges I had thought were permanently burned. The next morning, I prepared for the decisive meeting with a sense of clear purpose. I didn't know exactly how everything would unfold, but I was determined to make my voice heard, not just for the sake of fairness, but for the future my father had envisioned for the business he loved so much. The makeshift conference room in the back office of Martinez Grocery felt smaller with 5 people present. The air conditioner hummed loudly, struggling against the Arizona midday heat. I arranged my documents on the worn wooden table, the same one where my father used to count the register money every night. My mother sat upright at the head of the table, her face a mask of determination. Beside her, Daniela looked significantly less confident after our conversation at the park. On my side of the table, Miguel and Aunt Gabriela offered silent support. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steadier than I felt inside. I scheduled this meeting to discuss the future of Martinez Grocery in a professional and rational way. My mother crossed her arms. "The papers are already prepared, Julia." "I don't see the point." "Please," Aunt Gabriela interrupted with that authority only older sisters can summon. "Let's hear what Julia has to say." I nodded in gratitude and opened my carefully prepared presentation. "I want to start by showing you the real state of the business when I returned." Slide after slide, I presented graphs showing declining sales, bank statements with overdue accounts, collection letters from suppliers, and the bank's notice about the loan being at risk. This was the reality. We were less than 90 days away from foreclosure and total loss of the business. My mother looked away, the first crack in her resolve. Beside her, Daniela stared at the numbers, wide-eyed. Apparently, many of these details had been omitted from their conversations. Now, look at the transformation. I moved to the next section: graphs of growth, new contracts, product innovations, and community recognition. In 18 months, we increased sales by 40%, tripled net profits, and reduced debt by 65%. Miguel followed up with technical details about improved profit margins and optimized operational costs. My mother listened in silence, her expression unreadable. "Finally," I continued, reaching the crucial part, "I want to show you my personal investment." I slid a folder across the table. "Here are all the receipts for the investments I made using my own savings. 57.824s in equipment, renovations, and marketing. Not to mention career opportunities I turned down, which would have amounted to approximately $120,000 in lost income." The silence that followed was heavy as concrete. "I'm not asking you to ignore Daniela," I concluded. "I'm asking for fair recognition of my role and an equitable stake in the future of this company that I helped save." My mother, visibly uncomfortable, held her ground. "I appreciate your presentation, but the decision has already been made. It's what your father would have wanted." That was when Aunt Gabriela stepped in, her voice soft but incisive. "No, Carmela, it's not." All eyes turned to her. "Antonio came to me weeks before he died," my aunt continued. "He wanted to create a plan that included both daughters in the business succession." My mother paled. "He never told me that." "Because he believed you knew, that you shared his vision. Antonio valued contribution and merit, not just blood ties or tradition. He would be deeply disappointed by this injustice." The words hung in the air like a long suppressed truth, finally set free. My mother looked at my father's portrait on the wall, his expression gentle yet determined, captured in a rare moment of relaxation. Surprisingly, Daniela was the first to shift her stance. Maybe we can consider some kind of partnership," she suggested hesitantly, looking between me and our mother. Something in my mother's expression changed, a mixture of confusion and perhaps for the first time genuine doubt about her course of action. "Are you suggesting splitting ownership?" she asked Daniela. "It would be fair," my sister replied, avoiding my gaze. "Julia invested real money here, and, without her, there probably wouldn't be a business left to transfer." Daniela's admission seemed to break open a floodgate. Long-buried family truths came to light in that small room. My mother's favoritism toward Daniela, "You were always more like me, easier to understand." Daniela's resentment over my previous success. "Everyone always talked about how brilliant you were, how everything came easy for you." And my own hurt from being constantly underestimated. "You never believed I cared about the family business just because I chose to leave and study." For an hour, we talked with a level of honesty our family rarely allowed. Miguel and Aunt Gabriela occasionally offered outside perspectives, But mostly, they let the three of us navigate the turbulent waters of our relationships. "Why did you never tell me how you felt?" I asked my mother when she admitted she was afraid I would abandon the business again when something better came along. "Because you're like your father," she answered, her voice trembling. "Always looking toward the horizon, always full of big ideas. People like you don't stay in small family businesses forever. So you decided to push me away before I could leave on my own," I concluded, the painful realization settling in. She didn't respond, but her silence was confirmation enough. As emotions calmed, Daniela made a concrete proposal. "What if we postpone any final decision on ownership transfer? For 6 months? During that time, we can work together and see how it functions in practice." My mother considered the suggestion. "And what if, at the end of that period, we decide the partnership doesn't work? Then we negotiate a fair exit for whoever wants to leave," I replied, "based on the real value invested and each person's contribution." Aunt Gabriella nodded approvingly. Antonia would be proud of this solution. After further discussion of practical details, we finally reached a preliminary agreement. We would delay any formal transfer of ownership for 6 months. During that period, we would work together with clearly defined responsibilities, me handling marketing, operations, and product innovation, Daniela overseeing finances, human resources, and supplier relations, my mother serving as a mentor and guardian of the traditions that gave the grocery store its unique character. Miguel would formally document my financial investment as a loan to the business, ensuring that regardless of the outcome, that amount would be recognized and eventually reimbursed. When the meeting ended, the atmosphere was cautiously optimistic. There were no definitive winners or losers, just a tentative commitment to try a new approach. As I gathered my documents, my mother approached me. For the first time since I returned, she hugged me. Not the quick, formal embrace that had become our norm, but a real hug that reminded me of my childhood. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Your father would be so proud of you." The words I had longed to hear for so long came when I least expected them. I returned the hug, feeling decades of tension begin, to dissolve. In the parking lot, Miguel caught up with me. "How are you feeling?" I reflected on the question as I watched the sun begin to set behind the newly renovated Martinez grocery sign, a result of my revitalization efforts. "Honestly, I don't know. I didn't win, but maybe we all gained something more important. A chance to rebuild," he suggested. "Exactly." I smiled, feeling a mix of exhaustion and hope. "Now comes the really hard part, working together after everything that happened," he laughed. "If anyone can make it work, it's you, Julia Martinez." As I drove home, I reflected on the turbulent journey since that phone call from Miguel so many months ago. I had returned to save a business, but in the process, maybe we were finally starting to save our family. The next 6 months would be challenging. Old patterns don't change overnight, deep wounds don't heal instantly. But for the first time since that disastrous dinner, I felt something I had lost. Hope. I didn't know exactly how our family story would unfold, but I was determined to ensure that the legacy my father started would not just survive, but thrive, in ways he might never have imagined. And maybe, just maybe, our family's scars could become part of the strength we would build together. Our 6-month trial period revealed something unexpected. Daniela and I actually worked well as partners. Her skill with numbers complemented my creativity and marketing. The business thrived under our shared leadership. The defining moment came when Mr. Morales announced his retirement. The traditional Mexican bakery across the street would be left without a successor, threatening an essential part of the community. After nights of family discussions, we arrived at a surprising solution. My mother would transfer 50% of Martinez grocery to Daniela, while keeping 10% for herself. I would use my savings to acquire the bakery, with my mother and sister as minority partners. We established Martinez Family Enterprises as the umbrella entity for both businesses. We removed the back walls, creating a small food plaza between them. The grocery store and bakery maintained their own identities, but strengthened each other. 1 year after our initial confrontation, Martinez Food Hall had become a model for revitalizing traditional businesses and an example of how family enterprises can reinvent themselves. Robert Chen, initially our adversary in the lease negotiations, was so impressed that he even became a minority investor in our next expansion. On a quiet evening, my mother finally explained her past fears. "I was always afraid you would leave again, Julia. I thought that if the grocery store belonged to Daniela, at least part of the family, would stay together. I never imagined we could grow like this, together. The crisis that nearly tore our family apart ended up strengthening us in unexpected ways." My father's legacy didn't just survive, it evolved into something he could never have imagined. When I saved our business from bankruptcy only to hear my mother announce that she would pass it all to my sister, I felt like my worth was being denied. What none of us realized was that that painful moment would trigger a journey that wouldn't just save a business, it would fundamentally transform our family. Sometimes, what feels like the end of a dream is just the beginning of a much bigger one we have yet to see.